Okay, it's 10 o'clock, so let's get started. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone from all over the world. So welcome to today's Service Science Online Forum series. So I'm Renyu from CUHK Business School, also the moderator of today's fireside chat with Gad Allon, a professor from Wharton School. So please mute yourself and leave your questions in the chat box. I will also open the floor for the questions from the audience lively in the middle as well as at the end of the event today. So Gad is the Jeffrey Castwing Professor from Wharton as the guest of today's online forum. I believe Gad probably needs no introduction as a leader of service science, whose research has indeed inspired generations of young scholars, including myself. Beyond his scholarly contributions, Gad also directs the interdisciplinary program in management and technology, which is a joint program of UPenn Engineering School and Wharton. He also started an online education platform for class and wrote a weekly blogs called Gad's Newsletter on his insights about scaling operations, gig economy, network, as well as supply chains. So because of these exceptional and mixed experiences, I'm pretty sure that Gad is the right expert for today's online forum, future-proofing business education in the age of AI, which we believe is a topic that could be of interest for everyone here and beyond. So this is definitely a very big topic, even for a PhD thesis, I believe. So let's just divide and conquer it from different perspectives. To set up the stage, Gad, probably we can start with you share with your thoughts about what you believe is the single shift that AI may bring to business education, probably for the next 5 years or so. Okay.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for a very kind introduction, and thanks for inviting me to do that. I think first of all, the name of that session indeed is a big name, and I'm not sure that I can actually do justice to this topic. To some extent, really, I think it's interesting. It's an interesting question. Like, what's going to be the biggest shift? I think we're not ready yet to claim what will be the big shift. I think that I'll say it like that. If I think about like the business education, I think about why people are coming to study business. The majority of the people are doing that for one, and here I'm talking about primarily about MBAs, not about undergrad or something like that. But MBAs are coming for four reasons. One is skilling, so getting new skills. Second one is career switching. Third one is networking, and the fourth one is finding time to actually think about what they want to do next. So basically using education as a guide, as a disguise for thinking about whether they want to start a new venture, whether they want to actually make a life change or whatever. In that sense, I don't think we're going to see a big difference in the type of people we get. The type of people we get, and I can speak with the schools that I taught in, which are Kellogg and Wharton, are probably not the top people in their class, but these are really good people that either started a career in somewhere and they want to switch, or they realize that in the career that they're in, they need to have a better network, or they want to start something other through acquisition or start their own venture, and they want to take the time. In many ways, but basically, if you hear what I'm saying, I don't think any of that will change with AI. The set of tools will change, of course. If in the past, most of them had to find a founder, for example, to be able to think what they want to do next, they had to find a founder. Now, many of them can vibe code. They're into that. If in the past, many of them went into tech firms to do product management roles, these roles will disappear. I don't think product management is going to remain. And what I see a big shift is in the type of businesses they're trying to get involved with, which are primarily businesses that have something that's related to AI, but more than that, has a bearing in the physical world. Because that's really the advantage that many of them have, is the fact that they actually are, or at least that's where they realize that there is a residual advantage for them. They're not going to be the founder of a firm like Cursor or Mercor, but they might be a founder or an operator in a firm that takes, for example, accounting, and add a layer of AI on that. So Output, input, I don't see a big difference. Output, there will be difference primarily because it's going to change the mix of jobs they're going to see. And many of the jobs that we were trying to do until now, educate people, were primarily white collar jobs, and these white collar jobs are going to change. But overall, I think business education is probably among the different skills we have. I wouldn't say safe, definitely far from being safe, but I think as an education, since we're really never about gatekeeping, unlike law, actually has sort of like a good future ahead of it if we really iterate correctly.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so it's a very insightful kind of opinions. But I also want to probably follow up a little bit. As you said, you just talk about MBAs. They have their purposes like setting up networks, probably career shifts. How about undergrads? Because we know Wharton has undergrad programs, and probably most business school programs also have undergrads. And you also direct the undergrad programs, joint undergrad programs of technology and management. So what do you think are the baseline, probably, which I call them AI competencies, should every 19-year-old business student should really master, regardless of their majors, probably? And do you really think if, let's say, we incorporate some hardcore or engineering basic techniques in our business undergrad curriculums, which probably are not there for most of the schools, do you think this will be something that's good for our students?
So it's a good question, but let me talk a little bit about that. I don't have to acknowledge that I don't think about so much broadly about business education in undergraduate. I primarily think about from a very, very specific angle. So just for those of you on the call that don't know the program, I'm director of the program, but the program is a very unique program. It's a coordinated dual degree between Wharton and the engineering school. My students are doing both an undergrad at Wharton and an undergraduate in whatever engineering major they're interested in. The program is known primarily because the alum have done really, really well. The CFO of Tesla until recently, the founder of AQR, which is an important hedge fund, founder of StubHub, many other startups recently are funded by alums. The guy that runs the TMT team at Goldman, so a very wide spectrum of people. And in many ways, these are people that for many years were already doing engineering and business at the same time. And when I think about like what's the success of this program has been, it's primarily been not so much on what we teach them, but actually who we select to this program. And so I'll say that we have really three criteria that we use to choose and that we emphasize when we choose. We look for people that are extremely rigorous. We look for people that have done the highest math and physics in their school, for example. We look for people that are extremely entrepreneurial. So these are people that have demonstrated that they can actually take a specific topic and go all the way in. So, well, I'll give an example. One of our alums, or actually not an alum, someone that dropped after a few years in the program, was someone that when he was a 16-year-old, his parents bought a Tesla, and he realized that the Tesla communicate with the home network. He hacked the Tesla and built an app that allows you to see where your cars are. One day, he got a call from Elon Musk to come and actually work for him and build software at Tesla. In fact, this guy built ultimately the apps that they use to this point to manage their charging stations. I'm telling this story because this is sort of like this is someone that when he started doing that, of course, AI was just very nascent. Now, of course, AI is very deep. So he just recently sold the firm to Snap. But I think that's what AI is going to do in many ways to business education. Those who actually can and know where to look for things will be able to go as further as possible. And our job is going to be to look for people that are rigorous, and rigorous means that they can actually understand technologies as they evolve and have a very strong bias towards action. Those who can actually, rather than sit around and build another Excel model, can actually go and do. Because all the rest, those who can actually just build the model and not do, they will be replaced by AI. Those who can actually do, that's going to be very hard. Even agentic AI can do whatever you want it to do, but just we're not going to come up with the idea of hacking your car. It's just not something that's or building a new product for social calendaring, which was the part that he started afterwards. And so like I think the question is going to be, how do we change business education to be the one that goes deeper into topics that transcend these areas, so critical thinking, innovation, but the admission is going to be even more important than ever. If in the past we just looked for people that are good. I think we're going to see separation between those who are good and can do, and those just good in taking exams.
Okay, so do you have any insights on how can we select this type of people who are both probably technically rigorous, but also has the correct entrepreneurial kind of mindset?
Yeah. So good question. I can tell you what we do. I actually met this morning a parent and a kid, and I tell them they can tell you exactly what I told them, which I think is has been my guideline for the last 9 years. I look for things that kids do, and I say kids, it can be all the way to 26 or whatever, that it's very clear that the parents did not ask them to do. So I'm looking for things that basically the society around you will tell you that you're probably quite dumb to do, or when I say dumb, there's things that are when you look at them and say, why did they do that? It made no sense, but they actually still have done it for the next 2-3 years and just has gone as deep as possible. And by the way, it doesn't have to be technology. It can be the girl that was a dirt road biker. No parent will ever ask their kid to be a dirt road biker. So I'm looking for people, and I think that, again, going back to AI will enable these people to just, if they have an idea, to just go and run with that. And these are people that can go and run with ideas. Those who can actually just do or just analyze, I think, will be replaced. So I'm looking for people that do things that the parents did not enroll them in. And that's being an amazingly not easy, but easier thing to decipher once you start reading more and more about what people do.
Okay, so you just talk about the kind of quote unquote selection and how, if we decompose this process into first select and then to educate, do you think probably in the age of AI, quote unquote education itself, especially for undergrads, so how can we probably help them also develop this kind of, I would say, traits or features? Because I also see that is a very important because AI actually drags down the cost of developing
Right.
or building things that are otherwise impossible, let's say, just 2 years ago. So,
Yeah. So it's a great question, but let me first of all talk about what's going to be our biggest challenge in education, one of our biggest challenges in education, which is most of our education system is built on two models. One is a model of apprenticeship. That's our PhD program. We have someone do things with us for a long, long, long while, 4 years, 5 years, until we trust them. Then we bring them to the market and say, here's someone that I can attest that they've done things really well. And that model is being successful in deriving PhD programs, but this is a very expensive model and doesn't scale well. Then the main model we use in education at this point is the model that is built on the notion of spaced repetition and exams. Right? This is very much, most of our education system is built on, we teach something, then we give them exercises to practice that, and then we give them an exam. So basically the system is based on the notion of spaced repetition, exams, and grades, right? The incentives are grades, the mechanism is exam, and the pedagogical foundation is spaced repetition. The issue is that the new AI systems break our ability to do that, right? We are the way we run exams now is almost meaningless in a world where most people have access to ChatGPT and the like. So now you have, and most practice problems actually become an issue now, right? So sure, you can actually say the exam is going to be written on a piece of paper, so you have to come prepared, but there is a limit to how much you can actually teach like that. Or you can actually, for not every topic, you can, primarily in topics where you want people to program something, or you want to be able to run a regression. The moment they have access to technology, they have access to other things, and there are different ways to hack that, even if you believe that you can prevent that. So then that's probably going to be the biggest thing we'll have to rethink. So some people reverted to exams that are on paper. I think some of us very quickly are going to revert to having no exams. We're just going to do projects. But then you really don't know what they know, because then we lost the ability to do the spaced repetition. And then the other option is, of course, is to go to oral exams, where, go back many, many, many years. That's how things were done. That's also not very scalable. So that actually tells me that, I think we're going to be potentially, in my opinion, the biggest change in if you ask me where, the initial question was the next few years. If you ask me what's going to be in the long run for business education, I think we're going to change it in a way that the core might not be even taught anymore by us. We'll basically assume that people come and they can study the core either by themselves or through a combination of YouTube and ChatGPT or whatever. I'm using ChatGPT as of like a catch, as a name for everything will be LLM driven tutoring. But actually, most of the business education is going to be project-based learning. It's going to be case-based learning, and in fact, might be even broken down into few years of education, some type of working with firms, going back to work, so some type of internship that is done while people are in school, and then continue to learn over the years. The reason for that is that I think only once you go through that, people will say, oh, now I understand why I need to understand regression and why I truly need to understand it. Because until now, I just prepared for the exam, but the exam I can hack. And then so I think I anticipated that change to happen actually many years ago. It didn't happen when we moved to online, primarily because online itself was just not good enough. But in my opinion, online, so like online class together with ChatGPT, together with some place where you know that you're going to be held accountable in a classroom environment, in a social environment. So basically what I'm saying, spaced repetition without social interaction will just not be good enough. Social interaction where now people have to demonstrate their understanding of what was the output of AI, what actually they could build with AI. I think that can be quite powerful. And in my opinion, at least, that's going to be the future for our business education.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, very very thoughtful answers. So, just as a follow-up of our discussion here, so what kind of, let me call it, human capabilities? For example, let me just give you some examples like framing the problem, leadership, communication, so on and so forth, will remain business students. I mean, I'm talking about undergrad specifically, their core competitive edges in an age where AI probably will take care of, let's say, technical stuffs like coding, like some quantitative skills, like analytics.
So clearly innovation will always remain, but that's going to be a cliche, right? I mean, so I'm not, or even leadership. Leadership, what is leadership? Leadership is in sense of action and sense of direction. So clearly that's going to be remain important. I'm not saying anything new, but I think to me at least, there is no question that, or at least no question. I think there are two aspects that are going to remain important, and one is one we can teach and one I'm not sure we can teach. But the one we can teach, I think, is critical thinking. I think critical thinking is going to become more and more important. And again, it might be cliche, but I'll just give you an example or two examples. One is I have a policy that in my class that I'm allowed people to I encourage them in many ways to use ChatGPT. I teach a case-based class. I say you can use whatever you want. It's not that I like that they use it, but I say, well, this is clearly, if I say no, I will only penalize the honest people. So clearly, everybody's allowed to use that. But I tell them that if the answer is detectable as one that is coming directly from ChatGPT without any human judgment, they're going to lose all the points. So what do I mean by that? I don't say that if the language is ChatGPT type language, flowery language and full of adjectives and all of that, that's not what I mean. But if the answer is one that any human that would have looked at this answer and said, this just does not make any sense, then that means that actually they didn't exercise any sense. In which case, I could have just gone and asked ChatGPT myself. I don't need them as an intermediaries. And so I think in a world where ChatGPT probably is going to, or any AI is going to probably have 99% of the time be right, but the 1% where it's going to be wrong, it's going to be so awfully wrong that that was actually the issue with IBM Watson, right? The recommendation he made on cancer care, where some of them were so dangerous that they could actually kill people. And then so we need people to start exercise critical thinking exactly when it actually starts losing this capability. And we see it already with the adoptions of all of these tools, is that same with self-driving cars. People that use self-driving cars. And so even though they put their hands on the steering wheel, we know that they're not as careful as someone that is driving the car. So how do you know when is that 1% that you need to intervene, where you know that 99% of the time it's going to be even harder for you to decipher what's the answer? I think that's going to be the type of critical thinking we'll have to continue and develop. And I can tell you that when I'm invited now, I teach a day or something, 3 days on this topic, and invited by more and more organizations to talk about these topics, primarily because most organizations feel that that's exactly the skill that their employees live. So that's one. The second thing is is cost is and again, I'm not talking about, I mean, I'm talking about business education, but from a point of view of someone that will ultimately, I think, will need to interact with people, customers, can be a founder, can be some type of marketer. I think we'll need to develop the ability for people, or at least help them better develop customer or human empathy. And I don't mean, and it's important to say, I don't think that ChatGPT and the like cannot be emphatic. They can be, in fact. I mean, I'm happy to talk about an example of that I did in class recently. But it's really the fact that of truly understanding. I'll give an example. The same people I spoke this morning, that the parent and the kid, they were trying to pitch like an idea, and why the idea that they have is a great idea for a new product and so on. And ask them, okay, what is your insight? Why the 10 other products until now that failed, yours is going to be successful? What are you doing differently? And everything it could tell me was, I use AI for this, I use an API for that, I use, and it was really no deep insight on what's different. And so I think the ability to truly understand what is that's going to change, why your product is going to be different than others, not only differentiated, but what is the deep insight around it. I think, I'm not sure that we can actually teach it. It is possible that actually some people have it, some others don't. Clearly, those who have it, we can empower them to do better. Those who don't, we can help them fake it maybe a little bit. But that notion of where there is the place where I'm deeply understanding the other side in a way that I can potentially get some guideline and insight from AI, but really AI will not go as deep as that. I think that's going to be a skill that or capability we'll need to further develop among our students. And I don't think we do it at this point.
I see. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I fully agree with you. The latter one is extremely difficult to really teach, especially at a scale. Okay. Okay, thank you. So let's now move on to another type of education, that is executives. So yeah, seasoned executives, they probably lack the technical backgrounds for the newest versions of AIs. So how would you think to really shorten their AI learning curve without really diluting the rigor, or probably purposely diluting the rigor, either way? Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question. And here I'm going to be highly philosophical in the beginning, but then practical. One of my favorite philosophers is Ludwig Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein says that understanding is not a mental state. What he means by that, he explains, he says, many times you have a student that says, oh, now I understand. And usually you realize very quickly that they don't, right? Like, I mean, the fact that I'm saying, okay, now I understand doesn't mean that you really understand anything. Understanding is actually, so let's say you say, well, here's a sequence of numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Say, can you do number 8? The one after that, and we'll say 8. Say, okay, why do you do 8? And they explain why do, okay, and now they understand, okay, like the sequence is I plus 1 or I. But understanding is demonstrated by actually doing, not by saying, now I understand. And so the point here is that, to me at least, if we want to talk about, let me now take it to AI. So first of all, let me go back to the point that most of our exams, and that goes back to our discussion before, the way we learn whether people understand something is we want them to show us that they understand. Don't just tell us to understand, show, not tell. That's the advantage of project-based learning. That's the advantage of case-based learning. You have to show that you understand, not just enough to say. But the same is true for AI. And so I'll give an example. I'm teaching an online executive class on supply chain analytics. And the firm that I work with to create it said from the beginning, we want to do AI. I said, okay, we want to do AI, that's great. It's going to be very hard to do AI for the level of execs we're getting into this program. So the first 5 weeks are Excel-based. And the Excel, it's primarily forecasting and demand smoothing, and then you do EOQ, and then you do news vendor, and then you do optimization, right? But all of that you can do in Excel, and most of them feel very comfortable with that. But the last week, I do forecasting using AI, right? So but really the most basic things, right? Like, random trees, random forest, and so on, XGBoost and things like that. But the main point here is that to do that, they have to have a whole tutorial on how to install Python, how to program in Python, how to run in Python, how to and you realize that most people don't really know how to do that. Most people have never done it. I mean, most people can definitely survive well without doing that. But my main point to them is you have to do it to be able to talk about it. Everybody talks about AI, but once you do that and you realize that you can now replace this random forest with whatever method you want, the moment you know how to write that basic code, at the very least you run it, you know what it means, you know how long it takes, you know how easy it is to do that, you know how hard it is to do that, you know how the data has to look like. Now you can actually start talking with other people in your firm on doing things that are more sophisticated. The data is unstructured. Okay, now you understand what it means. The data comes in now you have more advanced method. You can actually ask them how this method, but I put a huge premium on doing rather than talking. And I know it's not the most rigorous, and they can do only one thing, and the moment there are any mistakes in the code, they don't even know how to debug it. Even though now debugging becomes a little bit easier with Cursor and the like, and Copilot. But even for execs, we have to force them to do it. Otherwise, they can just talk. And at this point, it's very clear there's no premium for talking anymore. So
Yeah.
even for execs, let's do.
Okay, good. Yeah, very, very good. So I also agree with you in this dimension. Even for them, they need to at least do it end to end at least once before they are able to quote unquote really talk about it, either internally or externally. So along the same side, so probably on a more mind-side level. So how can we really help these executives to identify probably some new opportunities that are otherwise impossible without, I mean, not in the previous era, and also to avoid these new potentially pitfalls that are actually native in the age of AI. So yeah, basically we see that the world is changing really a lot over the past 2.5 years. So yeah, do you have any thoughts on this question?
Yes, it's a great question. Just for the audience to know, I didn't cherry pick the questions. I'm saying that because the answer to the next question is exactly another course that I teach, or another session that I teach on a topic that I call moats in the era of AI, which is the question of what's going to happen to the notion of moats. Moats is a term that was coined by Warren Buffett, and that's basically the notion of durable structural competitive advantage, how these survive within the era of AI. And what the main argument that I'm trying to make in that session, that most traditional modes, which are primarily about economies of scale, network effects, switching costs, and the like, actually gets eroded. I'll give an example. Most of us are familiar with Copilot, and Copilot exists for many, many, many years, and GitHub Copilot even was acquired by Microsoft and so on. But then came a firm called Cursor, and within no time, basically completely obliterated the usage of Copilot. Everybody that I know these days, the serious developer, is using Cursor. And so a firm that came out of nowhere, no brand name whatsoever, basically came against a firm that has a significant brand name and what they thought is a moat, and completely demolished that. And so the argument I'm trying to make here is that firms have to rethink what happened to their moats. So last week, I taught a fairly big telecom firm. And we look at the moats of their competitive advantage over the last few years, right? So if you look at T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, and I cannot say which one was the firms I work with or spoke with, doesn't matter, even though it was nothing confidential about the conversation with them, but I prefer not to do that. You look at these three firms, basically the playbook was the same: building massive capacity network, then primarily trying to lure customers in, and either through very hard processes to disconnect, or through all kind of bundles like Verizon, where they have TV and internet and Wi-Fi and all of that together, prevent people from switching, right? So switching costs is a big moat, and capacity. And all of them over the last few years have done well. I mean, have done well in the sense that you can see margin expansion in all of them, even though they cannot charge the customer more, their cost is decreasing enough to actually increase their margins over the last 10 years, primarily by keeping, and all of that while keeping their customers. Actually, their retention rates are quite astonishing. So all of them were very, very happy about the first 2 hours. And then I said, okay, what about next? And if you look at what's next, AI is primarily going to potentially allow for virtualization of these networks. It's going to allow new entrants to come in, right? So you see already firms like the satellite firms, like Starlink and the like. And when you talk about reducing the cost or the virtualization of these networks, you have to think about the fact that maybe there are going to be new competitors. Like, maybe Amazon is going to try to say, why shouldn't I launch my own network? Why? I mean, Uber might launch their own network. And so to me, at least, what really we're going to see, what I'm trying to have these people think about is the fact that AI, in many ways, they're going to be firms, they're going to be AI native, or AI is going to change the technology in a way that unless you're going to adapt very quickly, you're going to allow for new entrants that you didn't really think about at that part. You should be less concerned about your traditional competition because they're very much thinking like you. But those who are not part of your network, they're the one that potentially are going to come and completely undo your competitive advantage. And then you have firms that have quite a bit of cash, or firms that are coming. In the case of Cursor, I think it's a great example. A firm that is completely AI native, that don't have the shackles of working within a big organization like Microsoft, that managed to rewrite the playbook, so to speak. So to me, at least, when I think about with execs about this question, that's really the question. What is the thing that I don't see in the short term, but in the long term, it definitely can undo all the work we've done over the last 10 years?
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Very thoughtful. So, well, I'm halfway done with this conversation. So I would like to open the floors for our audience. So, for those who are in the in the Zoom, do you have any questions for Gad about what we just talked about, the business, I mean, undergrad, MBA or EMBA education that have, I mean, that may need some change in the age of AI, whatever. Yeah. Any questions?
If anyone wants to type it in the chat or raise the hand and ask, actually, I think it's something nice to hear the voice of other people.
Yeah, you can just unmute yourself and or you have some thoughts about those questions that we just discussed.
Yeah, exactly. If anyone wants to disagree with something they said or suggest another answer, I would love to hear that as well. We have many smart people here on the call, so I would love to hear your thoughts as well. It's always the first person to ask or to join. After that, I think people feel more comfortable.
Okay, we can continue and we will open the doors at the end. Okay.
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 Yes,
So
people can think about maybe and type the question meanwhile if they have a question.
yeah.
Okay.
If anyone wants to type in, you just type in the chat box. I will moderate it. Okay. Okay, so next, let's switch gears to the other aspect of business school education, which is PhDs and research training, which we call it, probably just now we called it apprentice type of thing, where essentially training or educating the next generation of professors or leaders in MBA classrooms. Okay, so probably here we have a lot of PhD audience here, so I'm speaking probably on behalf of them. Okay, so do you have, probably let's get started with this one. Do you have any advice for operations or even broadly the business PhD students who are studying AI related topics or using AI technologies in their research? Do you have any suggestions probably for them?
So it's a very broad question. Let me actually separate between two types of people: those who have done already are doing research in other topics and thinking about getting into AI, and those who actually are just entering now the PhD world. So let me start actually, sort of like with the former, right? I mean, so these are faculty that are already doing other type of research. Maybe they do modeling, maybe they do empirical work, and are thinking about whether they should actually get more involved with AI. And my answer, of course, is here is or how to do that maybe. So I think to me at least the main advantage, the main sort of like thing that you have to do is that you have to do that, right? You have to jump. There's no question that AI is going to be a big part of almost everything we do, and so like that's going to be a critical jump. How to do that? There are two ways I think that I can recommend. And again, all of us speak from our experience, right? So when I'm talking about my experience, I can and I want to take my experience when I just started my position as at Kellogg by now, 20 years ago. Sort of like people start making the move toward empirical OM. There were people working on empirical OM before, but it was still very much just the beginning of that. And I did two things to try, even though I came from a very modeling background. I came from working with Avi Fedegren and Asaf Zivi. Both are very, very strong operation research people. And I wanted to do more empirical work. I didn't want to completely not do empirical, not do the modeling, but I wanted to do empirical. And the way I did it was to do two things. One is to start an empirical project together with Avi and Margaret. And when you do something, it forces you to learn it very fast. So I started going to classes at Northwestern from the econ department to try to understand better structural estimation. And I spoke with Aviv Nevo and other people there to try to better understand it. That was one. The second thing, I started collaborating with people that are empirical. So I was very lucky to have Sarang Deo as a colleague at the time, and worked on a project in healthcare, and working with a very, 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 very careful empiricist taught me what are the sensibilities. I knew what it means to, at least what makes for a good modeler. It's not that it wasn't that I was a good modeler, but at least I knew how a good modeler looked like by working with Avi and Asaf. What I didn't know what a good empiricist is. So working with a good empiricist allowed me to do that. So find someone, so first of all, and find someone in your area that you can actually collaborate to try to understand what's state of the art, what's good, what makes good research in that area. And I think the combination of the two was actually quite powerful. I try to do the same with AI now, given the fact that I wasn't educated by that. So I have several projects in that area that I'm going to talk about more and talk about my approach, what I think PhD students should do. But maybe before that, I see there is a question. And maybe we'll take the question. So Stella, maybe if you don't mind unmuting and asking the question rather than reading the question from the line, I think if you don't mind doing that, that actually will usually make the discussion nicer.
Yeah, Stella, do you want to unmute yourself to ask this question in the room?
Okay, I got a question concerning value proposition. So facing AI's potential to replace certain business functions, especially as junior analysts and consulting roles, what would you think? How should business schools adjust their value proposition in the short run and in the long run?
Yes, so it's a great question. I think, right? I mean, so like to some extent, a few years ago, I did a sort of like a thought experiment as part of a group, faculty with the deans, where we said, what needs to happen for us to cease to exist as business schools? Where I think it's a Jack Welch kind of a thought experiment. What needs to happen? And it's very clear that career switching is the #1 reason people still come to business schools. And you mentioned consulting, for example, because consulting is a job that many people come to business schools to as a career switching to, right? Most consulting firms recruit from business schools. Most banks and hedge funds recruit from business schools. And so it's a great question. To be honest, I don't think consulting is going to be completely eliminated. What consulting will happen is it will happen exactly what happened in law firms. But if you look at law firms, for many, many years, you had a whole pyramid where law firms at the bottom had very good lawyers that were primarily document sifters. They would look at documents and find evidence and would collect all of that. And then you realize that search can do a better job than all humans. And so the question was, what happened now? We'll not need junior lawyers anymore. And the answer was no, we need fewer of them, sure, but we need those who actually can use technology, but actually very, very quickly climb the ladder and become a partner. And so the question that law firms had was, if people have not gone through many, many years of document sifting, can they still become partners? And the answer was ultimately yes. I think what we might see in consulting firms are going to become smaller. Product, like I'll give you an example, many people finish a complete business school and go to become product managers. Product manager at Amazon is not really a product manager. It's someone that basically is in charge of maybe one small area within the website, and they're doing experiments on that. So you will not need any more thousands of these product managers and thousands of consultants, but you will need still really good people. Because a lot of that is work that is it's fairly complex, and a lot of that is work of scoping. Scoping is exactly what AI is not doing well. So I think many of the functions are going to remain. They're just going to be compressed. We're going to have fewer people do them. The one that are going to do them will have to do more things and to be able to be better in utilizing technology to do that. So I think, and career switching as a right? There is a reason that all these firms come to business schools, because for them, otherwise, finding the right talent is really, really, really hard. So they use us as a way to identify people that made the investment to change, and we did a lot of the selection for them. And that's why I go back to the point that I made earlier, which is if we will have to stay as the best we can in doing selection, because if we don't do selection well, and then ultimately we don't really help them career switch, our pipeline will completely be eliminated. But I don't think people will not need to continue in career switch. I think the reality that most people will always need to career switch. And I think firms will realize that the cost of attracting talent is potentially going to be harder and harder. So I don't think the value proposition per se will have to change. We'll have to adapt, however, to what the job actually means, and potentially the education will have to change. I'll give an example. It's very clear also that people are going to live longer, and our education needs will actually change decade by decade. The model of teaching people for 4 years and then never again afterwards, or maybe 4 years and then 2 years and never again, I think that's just not sustainable. And so will we see other models of, let's say, a subscription model where you get access to, you get 1 year of education, maybe 2 years of education, but then you're guaranteed both by your employer and by your school to come back for 2 weeks every year, or maybe a month every few years, to just do a refresh of all the things you learned, right? Negotiation from the beginning, leadership from the beginning, the learning the technical. So you can imagine a business model will have to change to account for the fact that people potentially will live longer, and whatever they learned will actually, they will forget a lot of that. B, will change not only because of technology, because they change as well, and the environment around them change. I'll give an example. There's an interesting trend that I've written a few weeks ago about, and I'm putting a shameless plug for my newsletter here, about something called the unbossing trend. The unbossing trend is actually a dual trend. It's a trend from fewer people want to be managers, and firms need fewer managers. Firms need fewer managers because managers or middle managers are in many ways easier to dispose of during academic time, during tough economic times. They're usually not the value creators. They are organizing, they are doing things, but they're not really creating value. And people also realize that in many areas, you don't actually need to be a manager to make a good living. In fact, you can do things that you want to do. Right? I'll give an example. At OpenAI these days, you make $2 million a year as an entry salary. Not as a manager, but actually someone that's doing research. So most firms, and I speak with many managers, fewer people want to manage. And that's an issue now, because in the past, you knew that people that are good people are going to climb up the ladder and manage over time. And those who not will probably move to other jobs or will be stuck in jobs without a ladder. That's going to change. We're not ready to think about that change. We're not ready to think about what does that mean for the future of firms. Is that just like a temporary change or a more durable change? That may change a little bit the type of education we're giving people, because that may actually, like, we might only have a small subset of people actually want to manage that we're going to come to business schools, and the rest are just going to continue and do other things, but they still need some of the skills we teach them, like negotiation. Even if you're not a manager, you need to know how to negotiate. Even if you're not a manager, you need to know how to analyze data. It might be that we'll have to rethink a little bit who are our typical customers.
Okay, thanks. That's
Great question.
Okay, so let's go back to the question of PhD training stuffs. So excuse me. So what kind of resources do you think should PhD programs or business schools provide for, I mean, our next generation of scholars, these PhDs, such as, for example, courses or industry connections, more data or compute? I mean, should we really provide to our students? Have you thought about this?
So I think that's actually the interesting thing. I think we're in a world where people need fewer and fewer resources. Sure, to train something like a big LLM, you need significant compute, but we don't want, that's not going to be our advantage in building these massive models. Our advantage is going to do in something maybe smaller, and something that's more specific in utilizing these. And so I think that's the interesting thing, right? If you look at firms these days, like Cursor that I mentioned, they're in the hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, It's a team of like 50 people. They raise actually fairly little money. There's a firm like Midjourney that is the competing firm to DALL-E these days. I don't think they raised any cash until now. It's like 40 something people without any. And so resource, like, I don't think PhD students need more resources. But what they need, however, is more like a thought of how do I make sure that whatever I think there is one thing I want to talk about, which is the fact that right everybody feels that they need to use AI, but I think there are opportunities to use AI in a way that's much more that is like primarily for scholars and operations. There are opportunities to use AI in a place that is unique and advances operations. And again, I only can talk about my own world, so I cannot really talk about other people, and I'm sure many people are thinking about that from their own angle. But I'll just give you two examples of research that is trying to utilize that. So one is I work on a project with Ken Moon and Maxime Cohen and Park from Berkeley that is looking at it's a gig economy related project, but we have data on when drivers are basically abandoning their shift, so to speak. Not abandoning, but they're stopping their shifts. The only issue is it's a very, very sparse data. So if you try to do any structural estimation, log likelihood and things like that just don't work well. So what's the solution? The solution is to try to use adversarial neural networks to be able to say, here is the predictions of the model. Here is what we see in reality. We're going to treat both of them as an image. And the question is, can you distinguish which image was created by the data and which image was actually real? Sorry, which created by the parameters and real. And the moment you cannot distinguish between them, that means that actually the data or the model is predicting that well enough. But here, basically what I'm trying to say, we're using a technology that's sort of like a black box technology, adversarial neural networks, but to try to use it to try to replace and deal with a situation which is actually very common in operation. We see only outcomes, we see rather than seeing everything that led to that. And so I think that's one opportunity where to think where AI can be used within OM to actually generate insights where otherwise the current solutions just do not work, or that solution does not fit in other areas. Or I have another paper where with Ken Moon again and Shufei Lu, and Shufei spoke about it in the last Informs, and she's going to talk about it in the next Informs. And what we try to do there is we have data from pilots, fighter pilots. We have like 50 different sensors in every point in time, and flights over flights of the flights. So the data is extremely dense and very noisy. And what we're trying to use there is deep reinforcement learning and activation maps and other things to try to primarily ask the very simple question: can we nudge a inexperienced pilot to be a more experienced pilot? But we use the AI here primarily to try to map between states that are global states. What I mean is that it's not a specific sensor in a specific point in time into the state of the pilot. And so I think this is sort of like, again, fairly, I would call it, and I wrote about it in my newsletter as well. I'm not the only one calling it, but Taylorism 4.0, if you will, right? Like in the sense of like, we have now an ability to think deeper on the state of the worker in a way that you didn't have until now. Because until now we were initially limited to measuring with a stopwatch, and after a while we can measure maybe their outcome if it's a call center or something like that. But now we actually have a lot more information. But this information comes in a very unstructured way. It's also very noisy and has many missing values. Can we use AI to try to map into what's the state of the system in a way that's richer than what we have until now? So I think there are opportunities for PhDs to do amazing things by taking tools from AI and seeing how they can actually solve traditional issues of OM, but now in a world with much more data, significantly richer both states and action spaces, and try to think about where they want to advance it rather than just applying that to one more and just in a more plain vanilla way. I think there are amazing opportunities for PhDs that start now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing your interesting research. So let's not talk about the teaching side. Actually, there's a question that directly private message me from Prince VJ. Do you want to, so Prince, do you want to unmute yourself and ask his question, or do you want me to help you with this? Okay. Let me just talk about his question.
Okay.
Would you please briefly outline the service operations course contents and how we could probably add AI concentrations into service science or service operations courses or service management? Yeah.
So I'll just be very honest. I don't teach a class on service operations. So I've not. In fact, even though most of my research is on services and service operation, I've really never taught a class in service operations. So can't really say much about what's the right curriculum there. But it's an interesting question in the following sense. I don't think service operation. So let's say like that. I think there are two types of service operation, right? Like there is the more digital one and more physical one. And I'll give an example. I do a project now. I cannot talk too much about this project, because just in the beginning of it, but I'm doing a project now with the New York Mets. And the project is basically trying to use AI to try to improve their service at the concession stands. And it's amazing how rich it goes back to the point about pilots. The richness of the data is just a whole different ball game, no pun intended. And that allows us to actually utilize tools and get into deeper insights that we couldn't get until now. So it's going to be turned into a research paper. We're still in the process of collecting some of the data and developing some of the methods around it. But just like everything, I think if you think about like the notion of service operations, we'll have two components. We'll have the customer side, which if I see how Ryan Buell is teaching his course about managing service excellence, a lot of that is about culture and service excellence, and that will remain. But at the same time, on the back end, we'll be able to do things with data that couldn't do until now. At least our MBA students or undergrad students could not do, but we could do now at the level of richness that was just unmanageable. So again, without teaching the class, I can imagine how a class will have these two components and can be a really, really interesting class, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. This is actually another question from the audience. Devote, do you want to directly unmute yourself to ask about your introductory stats course? Okay, let me then help you with this. Okay, so I'm teaching introductory statistics to Bachelor of Commerce students. It's a core course for second-year students. With the emergence of more and more powerful AI models, what should we teach students in these more quantitative courses? Is it really necessary to teach them all these technical tools as before? And how should we evaluate them as well? Yeah.
It's a great question. Let me make two arguments in favor and against. So one argument would be, unless you do things, you don't really understand them. So what do I mean by that? I just spoke recently with the faculty that teaches a stats course, equivalent stats course in a very good business school, and they use primarily a question that are more, let's say, a multiple choice, and they realize that their students that in the past knew, and they allow the students to use ChatGPT and whatever they do, but they know that in the exam, the question they're going to be, can you interpret that? That's the output. Can you interpret this and so on? And you realize that people really don't understand regression anymore. Like a question in the past was a very simple question that they just need to understand is actually a regression question. And like in the past, people would do it easily. Now people actually really didn't understand this is really what the question is. That will say we want people to actually be able to understand what regression does, that it's minimizing errors and stand errors and so on. What are stand errors and not just run it, because if they want to run it, they're not really going to understand it, and it's very hard to interpret if you don't understand. That's the argument of why teaching the foundation is still going to be important. Let me make the argument on the other side. When I was a TA many years ago in a class on operation research, in fact in 1999, we taught business students simplex. We actually taught people how to do pivot tables. How many people here, let's see if we could do with a quick show of hands, if you don't mind raising your hand, your virtual hand, or doing like some sign, if you know how to manually, still not remember, but in one point of your life, how to do pivot tables and do simplex on a piece of paper. How many of you in the audience can actually do that? Okay, yeah, we have a few people. That's great, right? That was the exam. That's what we taught. That was viewed as an important skill. Business students to do that. We no longer do that. I would say most of our students, if we say linear program, don't even know what we're talking about. They know optimization, they will go directly into Excel. And of course, they lost the capability to understand what's linear, what's non-linear. They run everything in Excel and they believe what Excel gives them is right. But we decided a few years ago that this is just not going to be important anymore. We don't need that battle. We lost that battle. I don't know which one is right. I'm torn, right? I mean, even then when I was TAing Simplex, I knew that that was not going to be sustainable. So that's definitely, I think, was a battle that was okay to lose. Maybe regression is not the one. Maybe if you don't understand regression, it's going to be really, really, really hard for you to understand what is even a statistical test. And so if you go back to what I think is going to be the same way that I thought about what was important before about critical thinking, I think causal inference is going to be extremely important. And it's very clear that most of our students and most of the world cannot really make the jump from association to causality. So causal inference and everything around causal inference is going to be absolutely crucial in a statistics class. So I cannot imagine building a statistics class that does not at least make sure people know how to run regression and understand then what does causal inference means, right? Like doing diff in diff, doing a randomized control trials, talking about endogeneity and question around that. I think is going to be really, really crucial in a class like that, because that's ultimately what's going to remain, the ability to analyze data, but then not understand what the implication of what they analyzed, and then make policy recommendation that actually will be absolutely horrendous.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're about 5 minutes until the end of this conversation. So I would like to ask the final question before leaving the doors open to the audience, which I call it the moonshot question. So imagine you had a clean slate to redesign business school for 2035, that means 10 years later. So what would you not replicate from today's model? And what probably radical AI-enabled features would you actually put in this new design? Okay.
Yeah, so I already hinted towards that. I'll basically try to think about how do we move to a world where there is just no core classes. Everybody they know what classes they need to know. They need to know statistics, they need to know accounting, they need to know basic finance, to do a discount cash flow. And the only thing we teach them are electives. In these electives, I'll make sure these are actually not online, these are in person as much as we can. Or if it's online, it's an online studio rather than over Zoom. And one thing I want to develop is for the students to continuously, for the faculty in that online, in that physical environment, to, like I always, when I had for class, the vision was to have like something called pilots have overhead display, when they can actually look at someone and they can see all the data where they look. And my vision at the time was that business education has to be like that. When I look at the students, I know exactly their background, I know exactly what the answer. And so I envision a class that is extremely captivating and engaging, actually doing things, analyzing cases, analyzing what happens now, but it's only electives that are really thinking about what's the cutting edge, what's going on, developing really like about causal inference. We don't teach them the basics. We just go directly into applying things, thinking, and then through that, they can go back always to study the core. And they will do the core again, maybe 5 times until they can actually be in class and speak in class. And everything is going to be about class participation, and everything is going to be about their ability to convince other people. And we'll have the tools to do that, because we'll have sensors everywhere in the class. So we'll sense continuously who's the best speaker and who's the most convincing one, and who's the most, not only speaks a lot, but also convince other people to change their opinion. And that's much closer to reality and much closer to what will make business education captivating. But I think that's sort of like we are much more than 10 years away from that. But I think 10 years is a feasible timeline for that, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very insightful. Okay, so I would like to now probably open the door.
Yeah, I see one question from
Yi Zhe. Do you want to unmute yourself and probably open your camera again as well to ask your question?
Thank you for Professor Allon's great talk, great insights. I just have a really quick question. So you have already mentioned like AI or LLM are very powerful tools. And do you think it's instead of teaching them the basic skills, like statistic skills, we should focusing or shifting our focus to the prompt engineering? So if they can ask great prompts.
Prompt engineering is not a real thing.
It's not
Let's
real.
just be clear. No, prompt engineering, basically is trying to disguise, like it's very clear at this point. Prompt engineering is the name to try to help people that don't understand what they're doing to understand what they're doing. If you really understand the topic, you don't need to teach prompt engineering. That's very clear. But if you understand something very, very deeply, you know what question to ask. Prompt engineering is basically trying to say, when you don't understand, we'll try to help you understand something. Doesn't work. There is no replacement for really deeply understanding something. So we should not teach people prompt engineering. That's not a topic that we need to teach. It's basically, it's not. Yeah, I'll stop with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Anna? Anna Muro, do you want to unmute yourself?
I need to unmute. Okay, sorry about that. I can also maybe put my video. All right, good morning, everyone. So great talk, great discussion. So my concern with all of this, it is clear that we're gonna need top talent, that we need deeper knowledge. The people who are gonna succeed actually are the deep, deep experts. The issue is there are not gonna be positions for all of the students that are in these programs, right? We're gonna have to reduce the number of students, right? The top schools are going to do really well in creating the top talent and getting it out there. But what does the rest of the world do, right? Do we really need so many people coming out with these skills when now a single person can do a lot more by taking the efficiency associated with AI and being able to just do a lot more and take all of those positions? I would like to hear your views, both and any others.
So Anna, great question. Let me suggest a very contrarian approach to what you were saying. One of my, I don't say it's my favorite book, it's a book but I like quite a bit, called Bullshit Jobs. It's a funny name to a serious book. And it says that Keynes in World War I predicted that the world will go to 15-hour work week. But the world actually did not go to 15-hour work week. It actually, people work actually even harder and harder. And one of the reasons that he says that the society invented more and more jobs that are what he called duct tapers, box stickers, and so on. And so what I'm actually thinking is the following. The people actually, the top, they actually don't need us. That's the reality. It's actually the people beneath them that need it. They need our credentials. They need our the degree. They need the education. They need the signaling. And I think the job that we have now will change. But I don't think we'll run out of good people that are maybe not great people, but good people that just want to find a job. And I think the jobs will change. We'll find new box stickers. Right? Think about how many corporate lawyers exist. Most firms can exist without corporate lawyers, yet we have more and more corporate lawyers. And so like I think telemarketers are going to disappear, but we'll find new jobs that was in the past telemarketers. I'm not as, I mean, again, I think it's a very bearish view on the world, and the fact that most of the constraints are the ones that we invented as humans to help sustain society rather than as really value creating jobs. But that's the reality. Most of the jobs that we actually educate people to are not the most value created jobs in the firms. These are just people that need to help other people at creating value in the jobs. And some of them, they're there to try to lubricate the jobs for the other people. So I'm not too worried about, I mean, I'm worried, very worried, but yeah, go ahead.
I think it's going to look very different though. So
yes, I agree with that.
We'll have to wait and see. Yeah.
Fully agree with that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, so probably the last question, Joe.
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Gad, for the sharp and inspiring thoughts, and thanks, Philip, for organizing this. Let me make the question quick. So it's about evaluation, about on open problems. This relates to two parts. One is for, let's say, students' open problems, like from qualitative reports to quantitative or technical projects that they can rely heavily on large language models. How to properly evaluate their contribution in this type of tasks. Second part, or also related, may not be that related, is research. So do you see with the new most advanced large language models, the reasoning models like O3 with deep research, people could already come up with quite high level reports or even papers or part of the papers like master levels or PhD levels. Then do you see a potential that there will be huge or rapidly growing submissions to the journals that contain potential errors or mistakes coming out from the large language models, and how can we handle this?
Right. So let me, since I have to stop in about a minute because we're already past time, but let me go only to the second question. I think it's a great question. But let me suggest one more thing, which is I think any journal that very soon will not use O3 to also referee papers will find itself publishing papers that are exactly the type you described. Because if O3 can write amazing papers, there's no reason it can also be used, cannot be used to referee them. So it might be that in a few years, by the way, we will not need any more journals because you'll have your own papers that you'll write, you'll publish them wherever you want to publish them. If I want to understand if your paper is good or not, I can actually run, by then it will be 017, if they will not find a better name, and see whether your paper makes sense, whether it, right? And so like it might be that the communication will go back and journals will actually find themselves much, much less important because the stamp of approval will be less important. I can actually just use a model to say, what is a good paper on the topic, and we'll be able to find it and judge it and say what's the contribution. So we'll move back to the Republic of Letters, the way it existed in the 1600s. And we'll go away from journals to just communication between people.
Right.
That's a great question. I don't know. I think we'll have to evolve with that because I think O3 can write good papers at this point. Not best paper, but good papers.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks everyone. So let's call it a day, and thanks again, Gad, for this very inspirational talks, discussions, and yeah, for everyone. So see you next month of our live forum. Okay, thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.